In the sun-scorched hills of Provence, a renowned explorer lies dead in a cave, poisoned, his treasured map to Visigothic gold stolen. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of deceit among three suspects: a vengeful guide, a fearful porter, and a rival driven by greed. As clues, torn map fragments, a cyanide-laced flask, a hidden vial emerge, Poirot sets a cunning trap, exposing the rival's deadly ambition in a thrilling showdown that unveils the truth in just 30 seconds. Chapter 1. The Cave of Shadows. The sun blazed over the Provençal hills, casting harsh shadows across the rugged limestone cliffs. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the heat, stepped from a creaking horse-drawn carriage onto the dusty path. His polished shoes and affront to the rocky terrain gleamed defiantly. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fumbled with a handkerchief, dabbing at the perspiration beading on his forehead. The air was thick with the scent of wild thyme and baked earth, and a faint breeze carried the distant bleat of a goat. "Confound this heat, Poirot," Hastings grumbled, squinting at the glaring landscape. "Why anyone would choose to explore these god-forsaken hills is beyond me." Poirot's green eyes sparkled with amusement beneath the brim of his straw hat. "Mon cher Hastings, the heart of adventure beats even in the most desolate places. And where there is adventure, there is often mystery. Today we are summoned to unravel one such enigma." The summons had come that morning via an urgent telegram from the local gendarmerie. An explorer, Monsieur Etienne Laroche, renowned for his quests for lost treasures, had been found dead in a remote cave. The circumstances the telegram hinted were suspicious. Poirot, never one to resist a puzzle, had insisted on departing at once, dragging a reluctant Hastings along. They approached the cave's entrance, a jagged fissure in the cliff face that seemed to swallow the sunlight. Two gendarmes stood sentinel, their uniforms dusty and their expressions taut. One, a young man with a nervous twitch, saluted as Poirot approached. The other, older and grizzled, gestured toward the cave's interior. "Monsieur Poirot," the older gendarme said, his voice low, "it is not a pleasant sight. The body is still inside as we found it." Poirot nodded, his mustache quivering slightly as he absorbed the gravity of the scene. "Merci, monsieur. Lead on, if you please." The cave was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the scorching world outside. The air carried a faint mineral tang, and the uneven floor crunched beneath Poirot's careful steps. A lantern held aloft by the younger gendarme cast flickering shadows on the walls, where stalactites hung like ancient chandeliers. Near a jagged stalagmite, the body of Etienne Laroche lay slumped, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His face, frozen in a grimace of pain, bore the marks of a sudden and violent end. His clothing, rugged explorer's garb, was disheveled, and a leather satchel lay open beside him, its contents strewn across the cave floor. A compass, a notebook, a few scattered coins. But one item whispered about in the telegram was conspicuously absent: a map. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands hovering over the scene as if to coax secrets from the air. "Observe, Hastings," he said softly. "The satchel is open yet not ransacked. The coins remain, the compass untouched. A thief would take all, no? But this is selective." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, frowned. "You think the map was the target?" "Précisément." Poirot's fingers traced the air above the satchel. Laroche was known for his pursuit of a legendary treasure, A hoard of Visigothic gold hidden in these hills. The map, it is said, was his guide. And now, it is gone. The younger gendarme shifted uncomfortably. Monsieur Poirot, the Inspector Dubois. He believes it may have been an accident, perhaps a fall or something he ate. Poirot's eyes flicked to the gendarme, sharp and unyielding. An accident, you say? No, no. The face, the posture, these speak of poison or perhaps something more sinister. We shall see what the coroner reveals. Rising, Poirot surveyed the cave, his gaze lingering on the shadows. A faint scuff mark on the floor caught his eye, barely discernible in the lantern's glow. He crouched again, tilting his head. Interesting, he murmured. A mark, not of Laroche's boots. Someone else was here. Hastings, ever practical, ventured, could it be one of the expedition party? There were others with him, weren't there? Indeed, Poirot replied, standing and brushing dust from his trousers. 3 men, I am told. A guide, a rival, a porter, each no doubt with a story to tell, and one perhaps with a secret to hide. As they emerged from the cave, the heat enveloped them once more. Inspector Dubois, a stout man with a walrus mustache, awaited them. He greeted Poirot with a mixture of respect and skepticism. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. But this case, it may be simpler than you think. Poirot smiled thinly. Simplicity, Inspector, is often the mask worn by complexity. I shall meet these companions of Monsieur Laroche. Their words, their gestures will tell us much. Hastings, squinting against the sun, muttered, I hope they're more forthcoming than this blasted cave. Poirot chuckled softly. Patience, mon ami, the cave has already whispered its secrets. Now we must listen to the living chapter 2. The 3 suspects. The Provençal sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a bruised purple sky over the expedition camp. A scattering of canvas tents huddled against the rocky hillside, their guy ropes taut in the evening breeze. The air, cooler now, carried the faint aroma of wood smoke from a smoldering campfire, around which the expedition's remnants gathered. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the chill, stood at the edge of the camp, his keen eyes absorbing every detail. The flickering shadows, the nervous glances, the way the flames danced on the faces of the 3 men who had accompanied Etienne Laroche on his final journey. Captain Hastings, ever at Poirot's side, rubbed his hands together for warmth. Dashed bleak place, this, he muttered, eyeing the rugged terrain. No wonder someone lost their nerve out here. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of amusement or contemplation. Hastings could never quite tell. Nerve, mon ami, is not always lost to the landscape. Sometimes it is the human heart that falters. Come, let us meet these gentlemen and see what tales they weave. Inspector Dubois, the local gendarme in charge, approached with a lantern, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. His walrus mustache bristled as he spoke, his tone a mix of deference and impatience. Monsieur Poirot, these are the men who were with Laroche. I've questioned them already, but they're a tight-lipped lot. Perhaps your methods will loosen their tongues. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, Inspector. The tongue it speaks, but the eyes and hands they confess. Introduce us, s'il vous plaît. The 3 suspects stood near the fire, their silhouettes stark against the glow. Dubois gestured to each in turn, his voice clipped. Jacques Moreau, the guide. Victor Dupont, a fellow explorer. Claude Benoit, the porter. They were all at the camp when Laroche went into the cave. Poirot stepped forward, his small stature somehow commanding the scene. The firelight caught the polish of his shoes, an incongruous elegance in the rugged setting. "Messieurs," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "I am Hercule Poirot." The death of Monsieur Laroche is a tragedy, but it is also a puzzle, and I, Poirot, am most fond of puzzles. I would hear your accounts of the day he died. Let us begin with you, Monsieur Moreau, the guide. Jacques Moreau. Jacques Moreau was a man carved from the very hills he navigated. His face, weathered as old leather, bore the lines of countless seasons under the sun. His eyes, deep-set and shadowed, flickered with a wariness that Poirot noted at once. His hands, calloused and scarred, rested uneasily on his knees as he sat on a wooden crate by the fire. His coarse woolen jacket smelled faintly of tobacco and earth. "I've already told the inspector," Moreau began, his voice a low growl. "I was scouting a ridge to the north when Laroche went into that cave. He was always poking about in dangerous places, that one. Never listened to advice. I warned him the caves were unstable, but he was stubborn, always chasing his precious treasure." Poirot's head tilted, his eyes narrowing. "This treasure, Monsieur Moreau, what do you know of it?" Moreau shrugged, his shoulders broad and heavy. "Stories, mostly. Visigothic gold, hidden in these hills centuries ago. Laroche was obsessed with it, said he had a map, but I never saw it. He kept it close, like a lover. And where were you precisely at the time of his death?" Poirot's tone was gentle, but his gaze was sharp as a blade. "Like I said, on the ridge, maybe 2 miles off. I was checking for rock slides. Those paths can be treacherous after rain. Came back at dusk and found the camp in a stir. Benoit was shouting about Laroche not returning." Poirot nodded, his fingers brushing his mustache. "And you saw no one else near the cave that day?" Moreau's eyes flicked to the fire, a brief hesitation. "No one. Just me, Dupont, Benoit, and Laroche. The nearest village is a day's ride. Merci, Monsieur Moreau." Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. "Observe, Hastings, the hands. They clench when he speaks of the cave. A small thing, but significant. The rival, Victor Dupont." Next, Poirot's attention shifted to Victor Dupont, who stood apart from the others, his lean frame taut with barely concealed agitation. His face, angular and hawk-like, was framed by a shock of dark hair, and his eyes glinted with a restless energy. He wore a tailored jacket, slightly worn at the cuffs, suggesting a man of ambition but limited means. His boots, caked with dust, bore the marks of recent travel. "Monsieur Dupont," Poirot began, his tone almost conversational. "You and Monsieur Laroche were rivals, non? Tell me of this rivalry." Dupont's lips curled into a sneer. "Rivalry? That's a polite word for it. Laroche was a thief, stealing credit for discoveries that should have been mine. We both hunted the Visigothic horde, but he had the money, the connections. I had to scrape by on my own wits." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And this map he possessed? Did it perhaps give him an advantage you coveted?" Dupont's eyes darted to the side, then back to Poirot. "Of course I wanted it. Who wouldn't? He bragged about it constantly, said it was nearly complete. But I didn't kill him for it, if that's what you're implying." "Yet you argued with him that day," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. The porter mentioned a heated exchange. Dupont's jaw tightened. "Yes, we argued. In the morning near the camp, he accused me of spying on his work, following him to the cave. I told him he was paranoid, that I had my own leads. I left for the eastern trails afterward, alone. Alone, Poirot repeated, as if tasting the word. And no one saw you, Monsieur Dupont? Dupont's sneer returned. The hills are vast, Poirot. I don't need a nursemaid to hold my hand. Poirot smiled faintly. Merci, monsieur. Your candor is illuminating. To Hastings he whispered, The eyes, Hastings. They avoid mine when he speaks of the map. A man who desires something so fiercely does not easily let it go. The porter. Claude Benoit, the third suspect, Claude Benoit, was a stark contrast to the others. Young, barely 20, with a boyish face and nervous hands, he seemed out of place among the hardened adventurers. His clothes were simple, patched trousers and a faded shirt, and his eyes, wide and anxious, darted between Poirot and the fire. He stood slightly behind Moreau as if seeking protection. Monsieur Benoit, Poirot said kindly, you are young to be part of such an expedition. Tell me, what was your role? Benoit swallowed, his voice trembling. I carried supplies, tended the mules, set up camp. Monsieur Laroche hired me in the village. I needed the work. And on the day he died? Poirot prompted, his tone encouraging. I was here at the camp, Benoit said quickly. I was unloading the mules, checking the water canteens. I didn't see him go into the cave, I swear. When he didn't come back by evening, I told Monsieur Moreau and we went looking. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was sharp. You handled the water, you say. Did you perhaps fill a flask for Monsieur Laroche? Benoit's face paled, his hands twisting together. Yes, but it was just water from the camp supply. I didn't do anything to it. Calm yourself, jeune homme, Poirot said, raising a hand. I accuse no one, yet. But tell me, did you see this map of which everyone speaks? Benoit shook his head vigorously. No, never. He kept it in his satchel, always locked. I only heard him talk about it when he was arguing with Monsieur Dupont. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Merci, Monsieur Benoit. You have been most helpful. As Benoit stepped back, visibly relieved, Poirot murmured to Hastings, The boy is frightened, but of what? Guilt? Or merely the weight of suspicion? The camp's tension. With the initial questioning complete, Poirot and Hastings withdrew to a small tent set aside for their use. The camp was quiet now, save for the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a wind through the hills. Dubois joined them, his lantern casting long shadows on the canvas walls. Well, Monsieur Poirot, Dubois asked, his tone skeptical. What do you make of them? Poirot sat on a folding chair, his hands clasped over his stomach. Each man tells a story, Inspector, but stories are like maps. They may lead to treasure or to a cliff's edge. Monsieur Moreau, he is cautious, his words measured, but his hands betray a tension. Monsieur Dupont, he burns with ambition, and his rivalry with Laroche is a fire that may have consumed more than words. And young Benoit, his fear is genuine, but is it the fear of a guilty man or one caught in a web not of his making? Hastings frowned, sipping a tin mug of tea. They all had the chance, didn't they? Laroche was alone in the cave, but any of them could have followed him. Précisément, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. Opportunity is not enough. We must find motive and means. The map is gone, but why? To hide it, to use it, or to destroy it, and the poison, for I am certain it was poison, how was it administered? Dubois grunted. The coroner's report will tell us more. It's due tomorrow. But I warn you, Poirot, these men are rough sorts. They won't confess easily. Poirot smiled, a cat-like curl of his lips. Confession, Inspector, is not always spoken. The little gray cells, they observe the unspoken, the glance, the gesture, the pause. Already I see threads in this tapestry of deceit. The first clues. As Dubois left, Poirot rose and paced the small tent, his mind a whirl of deductions. He paused, staring at the flickering lantern. Hastings, consider the satchel in the cave. It was open, its contents spilled, yet nothing of value was taken except the map. This suggests a purpose, not panic. The killer knew what he sought. Hastings nodded slowly. And the scuff mark you found? You think it's from the killer? Perhaps, Poirot said. It was not Laroche's boot, nor the gendarme's. I have asked Dubois to compare it to the boots of our 3 suspects. A small detail, but the small details, Hastings. They are the bricks of truth. He turned to the tent's flap, peering out at the camp. The fire had died to embers and the 3 suspects had retreated to their tents. Yet Poirot's gaze lingered on the darkness beyond, where the cave's entrance lay hidden in shadow. There is something else, he said softly. Laroche was a man of method, a planner. Why did he enter the cave alone without his guide? Did he suspect danger, or was he lured? Hastings yawned, stifling it with effort. You're seeing mysteries everywhere, Poirot. Maybe he just wanted a look. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. A man like Laroche does not risk his life for a look. There is a reason, and it is tied to that missing map. Tomorrow we shall dig deeper, into the cave and into the hearts of these men. As they prepared to retire, Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The guide's wariness, the rival's anger, the porter's fear, each was a clue, a thread in the intricate web of Laroche's death. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows of the Provençal hills, was the truth, waiting for Hercule Poirot to uncover it. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Flask. The dawn broke over the Provençal hills with a pale, golden light, softening the harsh edges of the rocky landscape. The expedition camp stirred reluctantly, the clatter of tin mugs and the low murmur of voices mingling with the rustle of canvas in the morning breeze. Hercule Poirot, already immaculate in his pressed suit and polished shoes, stood outside his tent sipping a cup of hastily brewed coffee that was, to his refined palate, barely tolerable. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the camp, noting the movements of the 3 suspects as they emerged from their tents, each carrying the weight of the previous day's tragedy in their own way. Captain Hastings, rubbing sleep from his eyes, joined Poirot, his expression one of mild exasperation. Up with the larks, eh, Poirot? I swear you never sleep when there's a case afoot. Poirot's mustache curved slightly. Sleep, mon ami, is a luxury for those unburdened by the pursuit of truth. The little gray cells, they demand vigilance, and today they are most curious about a certain flask. The coroner's report had arrived with the morning's courier, delivered by a dusty gendarme on horseback. Inspector Dubois, his walrus mustache drooping with fatigue, handed the document to Poirot with a grunt. Here it is, Monsieur Poirot. Not much to go on, but it confirms your suspicion. Poirot's gloved fingers took the report, his eyes scanning the precise handwritten notes with the intensity of a hawk. Etienne Laroche had indeed been poisoned, the coroner concluded, by a fast-acting toxin, cyanide to be precise. The poison had been ingested likely within an hour of his death, and traces had been found in a silver flask discovered near his body in the cave. Poirot's lips pursed as he read, his mind already weaving connections. Cyanide, he murmured, closing the report. A choice both cruel and efficient. It requires knowledge, access, and intent. Tell me, Inspector, this flask, where is it now? Dubois gestured to a small evidence box guarded by the younger gendarme from the previous day. Locked away, as you see. We tested it ourselves. The water inside was laced with cyanide. No mistake. Poirot approached the box, his movements deliberate. The gendarme unlocked it, revealing the flask. A handsome object, its silver surface engraved with Laroche's initials E.L. in an elegant flourish. It was an item of quality more suited to a gentleman's study than a rugged expedition. Poirot lifted it carefully, turning it in the light. A faint scratch marred the rim, barely noticeable, but his keen eyes caught it at once. Curieux, he said softly. This flask, it is not the sort one carries casually into a cave. It speaks of pride, of possession, and yet it became the instrument of death. Hastings, peering over his shoulder, frowned. You think the killer tampered with it? But how? It was Laroche's own flask. Précisément, Hastings. Poirot's voice was low, almost a whisper. The flask belonged to Laroche, but who had access to it? Who filled it, touched it, knew its habits? We must trace its journey. The camp's routine. Poirot requested a tour of the camp's daily operations, insisting that Dubois summon the three suspects to recount their routines. The camp, though small, was organized with military precision. A central fire pit for cooking, a tent for supplies, and a makeshift corral for the mules. The water supply, stored in large canteens, was kept under a canvas awning to shield it from the sun. Poirot examined the canteens, noting their sturdy construction and the fact that they were unguarded during the day. Monsieur Benoit, Poirot began, addressing the young porter who stood nervously by the supply tent. You said yesterday you handled the water. Did you fill Monsieur Laroche's flask on the day he died? Benoit's face flushed, his hands twisting in his pockets. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I filled it in the morning from the main canteen. He always asked me to keep it full. He said the cave air was dry. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did you notice anything unusual? The flask? Was it locked away or left about? It was in his satchel, Benoit said, his voice unsteady. He kept it locked, but he gave me the key that morning to fill it. I didn't touch anything else, I swear. Poirot nodded, his expression kind but probing. And after you filled it, where did it go? Back to his satchel, Benoit replied. I locked it and gave him the key. He took it to the cave later that day. Merci, Monsieur Benoit. Poirot turned to Jacques Moreau, the guide, who leaned against a tent pole, his weathered face impassive. Monsieur Moreau, you are familiar with the camp's routines. Did you ever handle this flask? Moreau's eyes narrowed slightly, his fingers brushing the tobacco pouch at his belt. Never touched it. Laroche was particular about his things, kept that flask like it was gold. I saw Benoit fill it sometimes, but that's all. Poirot's gaze lingered on Moreau's hands, noting the faint tremble as he spoke. And the water canteens, were they ever left unattended? Moreau shrugged. Sure, during the day. We're all busy. Mules, gear, scouting. Anyone could have gotten to them. Anyone, Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. He turned to Victor Dupont, who stood apart, his hawkish features tense. Monsieur Dupont, you argued with Laroche that morning. Did you perhaps see this flask during your exchange? Dupont's lips curled into a thin smile. I saw it all right. He was waving it about, boasting as usual. Said he'd drink to his success once he found the treasure. I told him he was a fool to trust anyone in this camp. A fool, Poirot echoed, his voice soft but piercing. And yet, you did not touch the flask? Not a chance, Dupont said, his eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before sliding away. I had my own water, and I wasn't about to share a drink with that braggart. Poirot thanked them, dismissing the suspects with a wave. As they dispersed, he whispered to Hastings, each denies touching the flask, yet each had opportunity. The canteens are unguarded, the satchel's key was handled. The poison, it was introduced with care, not haste. The flask's secrets back in their tent. Poirot examined the flask again, this time with a magnifying glass he produced from his pocket. The scratch on the rim intrigued him. It was fresh, not the wear of age. He tilted the flask, noting a faint residue inside, a crystalline sheen that confirmed the coroner's findings. Cyanide, he said, dissolves quickly in water, leaving little trace. But this scratch, perhaps it tells a story. Hastings, sipping a fresh cup of tea, ventured, could someone have forced the flask open to add the poison? Poirot shook his head. No, the scratch is too delicate, not a pry mark. It suggests something else. A tool, perhaps, or an accident in the act of poisoning. We must learn more about this flask's history. He sent for Inspector Dubois, requesting any information on Laroche's personal effects. Dubois returned with a logbook from Laroche's tent which listed his possessions. The flask, it noted, was a gift from a patron in Marseille, given to Laroche a year prior. A patron, Poirot mused. We must inquire further. Was this patron a friend or perhaps one with a motive? Dubois promised to telegraph Marseille for details, though his skepticism was plain. You think this flask is the key, Poirot? It's just a container. Just a container. Poirot's eyes twinkled. No, Inspector. It is a vessel of death, chosen with purpose. The killer knew Laroche's habits, his pride in this fine object. They used it to ensure his end. The suspects' reactions. That afternoon, Poirot observed the suspects as they went about their tasks, seeking the subtle cues that betrayed their thoughts. Moreau was methodical, checking the mule's harnesses with a practiced hand. But his glances toward the evidence tent were frequent, his jaw tight. Dupont, sketching maps in his tent, worked with a feverish intensity, pausing only to glare at the gendarmes as they passed. Benoit, tasked with cleaning the camp, fumbled with a bucket, his eyes darting nervously whenever Poirot approached. Each behaves as if watched, Poirot told Hastings, strolling along the camp's perimeter. But by whom? The law or their own conscience? Hastings frowned. Benoit seems the most rattled. Do you think he's hiding something? Perhaps, Poirot said. His youth makes him vulnerable, but vulnerability is not guilt. Dupont's ambition burns bright, and Moreau's reticence hides a past we have yet to uncover. We must press them further, but with care a new discovery. As evening fell, Poirot requested a private meeting with the younger gendarme who had been guarding the evidence box. The boy, barely older than Benoit, was eager to please. Monsieur Poirot, he said, I noticed something odd when I moved the box this morning. There's a cloth inside, wrapped around the flask. It smells strange. Poirot's interest piqued. He examined the cloth, a coarse linen square stained faintly yellow. The smell was subtle, a mix of chemical sharpness and something herbal. Mon Dieu, he whispered. This cloth may have held the poison before it was added to the flask. A careless mistake by our killer, he instructed the gendarme to preserve the cloth for further analysis, then turned to Hastings. This is significant, mon ami. The killer handled cyanide, perhaps in crystal form, and used this cloth to avoid contamination. We must find where such a poison could be obtained in these hills. Hastings, ever practical, suggested, could it be from the village? Or perhaps one of them brought it from Marseille. Both are possible, Poirot said. Tomorrow we shall inquire in the village and search the suspect's belongings. But tonight we watch. The killer knows we are close, and fear makes men careless. As the camp settled into uneasy silence, Poirot stood by the fire, his silhouette small but commanding. The flask, the cloth, the missing map, these were pieces of a puzzle, each fitting into a pattern only his little gray cells could discern. The truth, he knew, was near, hidden in the shadows of motive and opportunity, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it was brought to light. Chapter 4. The Rival's Ambition. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Provençal camp, gilding the canvas tents with a deceptive warmth. A faint mist clung to the hills, softening the jagged limestone cliffs that loomed over the expedition's base. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat draped over his arm, stood at the camp's edge, his eyes fixed on the distant cave where Etienne Laroche had met his end. The air was crisp, scented with pine and the lingering smoke of last night's fire. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, joined him, nursing a tin mug of tea and squinting against the light. "Another day in this blasted wilderness, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice tinged with weariness. "I hope you've got a plan to wrap this up before we're all baked to a crisp." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Patience, mon ami. The truth, like a fine wine, requires time to breathe. Today we shall explore the heart of Monsieur Victor Dupont, the rival. His ambition, I suspect, burns brighter than this Provençal sun." The camp was stirring, the gendarmes moving with purpose as they prepared for another day of investigation. Inspector Dubois, his walrus mustache bristling, approached with a sheaf of papers. Telegrams from Marseille, detailing inquiries about Laroche's flask and the cyanide. Poirot accepted them with a nod, his gloved fingers flipping through the pages with practiced precision. "Anything useful?" Dubois asked, his tone skeptical but curious. "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "The flask, it was a gift from a Marseille antiquarian, a Monsieur Fournier, who funded Laroche's expeditions. The cyanide, however, is more elusive. No local chemist reports selling it recently. This suggests our killer brought it with them or procured it by other means." Hastings frowned. "Brought it from where? Marseille? Or beyond?" Poirot said. "But first we must turn our attention to Monsieur Dupont. His rivalry with Laroche is a thread we must pull." Inside Dupont's tent, Poirot and Hastings made their way to Victor Dupont's tent, a cramped canvas structure cluttered with the tools of an explorer's trade. Maps, yellowed and curling at the edges, were pinned to a makeshift board, their lines tracing the hill's contours. Journals filled with tight, angry handwriting lay scattered across a folding table. A compass, its needle quivering, rested beside a half-empty bottle of cheap wine. The air inside was thick with the scent of ink and dust. Dupont stood as they entered, his hawkish face taut with irritation. "What now, Poirot?" he snapped, brushing a lock of dark hair from his eyes. "I've told you everything." "I didn't kill Laroche." Poirot's smile was disarming, almost gentle. "Of course, Monsieur Dupont. I seek only to understand. You and Monsieur Laroche, you shared a passion for this Visigothic gold, no? Tell me of it." Dupont's eyes narrowed, but he leaned against the table, his posture defiant. "It's no secret. The hoard's been a legend for centuries. Gold, jewels, relics from the Visigoths, hidden in these hills after their empire fell. Laroche thought he was close, always bragging about his map. He said it was based on old texts, ones he'd bought from shady dealers in Marseille. And you?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but probing. "Did you have your own map, or did you rely on Laroche's?" Dupont's lips curled into a sneer. "I've got my own sources. I've been studying these hills for years, piecing together clues from ruins, inscriptions, anything I could find. Laroche had money, but I had knowledge. He was always one step behind me, stealing my ideas." Poirot's eyes flicked to the maps. 1953-13-09-01-2025 maps on the board. "And yet he found the map before you, non? This must have irritated you." Dupont's face reddened, his hands clenching. "Irritated? He was a thief, Poirot. He'd follow me, watch my movements, then claim the credit. Yes, I wanted his map. Who wouldn't? It was the key to everything. But I didn't kill him for it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And where were you, Monsieur Dupont, after your argument with Laroche that morning?" "I told you," Dupont said, his voice sharp. "I went to the Eastern Trails, scouting a site I'd found last month. I was alone, working on my own map. I didn't go near that cave alone," Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. "And no one saw you?" Dupont's eyes flashed with defiance. "I don't need a witness to prove my innocence. I'm no murderer." Poirot's gaze lingered on him, then drifted to the maps on the board. One, half finished, showed a detailed sketch of the hills with a red X marking a spot not far from the cave. "This mark," Poirot said, pointing. "It is significant." Dupont hesitated, then shrugged. "A possible site for the hoard based on my research. I was planning to check it that day, but I didn't get far before I heard about Laroche." "Merci, Monsieur Dupont," Poirot said, his voice calm. "Your passion is evident. But passion, it can lead to desperate acts." As they left the tent, Poirot whispered to Hastings, "His anger is real, but his story, it has gaps. The red X on his map, it is too close to the cave for coincidence." The rivals passed. Back at their tent, Poirot reviewed the telegrams again, cross-referencing them with notes from Laroche's logbook. A new detail emerged. Dupont had been in Marseille 3 months prior, meeting with a chemist under the guise of purchasing supplies for geological surveys. The chemist recalled Dupont asking about cyanide, claiming it was for pest control at a dig site. The inquiry had been dismissed as routine, but Poirot's eyes gleamed. "This is most interesting, Hastings," he said, tapping the telegram. "Monsieur Dupont has knowledge of cyanide and access, but why use it on Laroche? For the map or something deeper?" Hastings, sipping his tea, ventured, "He's ambitious, Poirot. If Laroche was about to beat him to the treasure, maybe he snapped." "Perhaps," Poirot said, pacing the small tent. But snapping is impulsive, and this murder was planned. The flask, the poison, the missing map, all point to calculation, not rage. A search of the tent. With Inspector Dubois' permission, Poirot requested a thorough search of Dupont's tent. The gendarmes, methodical but respectful, combed through his belongings. Beneath a stack of journals, they found a small leather pouch, its contents rattling faintly. Inside were fragments of old parchment, their edges jagged as if torn. The fragments bore faint lines, possibly part of a map, though too small to decipher fully. Poirot examined them, his magnifying glass poised. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "These are not Dupont's own work. The ink, the paper, they match descriptions of Laroche's map. How did they come to be here?" Dupont, summoned to explain, paled slightly but held his ground. "I found those near the cave after Laroche was dead. I thought they might be useful, so I kept them." "That's no crime." "No crime?" Poirot's voice was soft, almost dangerous. "To take evidence from a murder scene, monsieur, is most unwise. It suggests you had reason to be there." "I wasn't in the cave," Dupont snapped. "I saw the fragments on the path outside, that's all." Poirot dismissed him, but his mind was racing. "Hastings," he said, "these fragments are a clue, but not the whole story. If Dupont found them, why keep them hidden? And if he did not, how did they reach his tent?" The camp's whispers. As evening approached, the camp grew tense, the gendarmes' presence a constant reminder of the investigation. Poirot observed the suspects from a distance. Dupont retreating to his tent with a scowl. Moreau sharpening a knife with deliberate care. Benoit fidgeting as he fed the mules. Each man, Poirot knew, held a piece of the puzzle, but Dupont's ambition stood out like a beacon. Over dinner, a simple meal of bread and stew, Poirot spoke quietly to Hastings. "Dupont desires the treasure, this much is clear. But is his desire strong enough to kill? The cyanide, the map fragments, his solitary wanderings? These are threads, but not yet a tapestry." Hastings, chewing thoughtfully, said, "He's got the motive, Poirot. And now we know he asked about cyanide. That's damning, isn't it?" "Damning, but not conclusive," Poirot replied. "We need the link, the moment the poison entered the flask, the reason the map was torn. Tomorrow we shall visit the village, seek this chemist, and perhaps uncover more of Monsieur Dupont's secrets." As the stars emerged over the hills, Poirot stood outside, his silhouette small but resolute. The rival's ambition was a fire, but whether it had consumed Laroche remained to be seen. The truth, Poirot knew, was buried in the details. The scratch on the flask, the torn parchment, the unspoken fears of the camp. And he, Hercule Poirot, would unearth it. Chapter 5. The Guide's Secret. The Provençal dawn was a muted affair, the sky veiled by thin clouds that dulled the sun's usual ferocity. The expedition camp, nestled against the rocky hillside, hummed with a subdued tension, as if the very air anticipated the next revelation. Hercule Poirot, his suit pristine despite the dust, stood near the central fire pit, his hands clasped behind his back. His green eyes, sharp as ever, surveyed the scene. Gendarmes tending to their duties, mules stamping restlessly, and the three suspects moving with the guarded caution of men under scrutiny. Captain Hastings, yawning as he emerged from their tent, joined Poirot, his face betraying a mix of curiosity and exasperation. "Another early start, Poirot," Hastings said, adjusting his hat against the morning chill. "I suppose you've already solved the case in your sleep." Poirot's mustache quivered with a faint smile. Sleep, mon ami, is for those who lack the little gray cells. Today we turn our attention to Monsieur Jacques Moreau, the guide. His silence, I suspect, hides more than his weathered face reveals. The previous day's discoveries, the poisoned flask, the map fragments in Dupont's tent, the faint trail of cyanide, had sharpened Poirot's focus. While Victor Dupont's ambition burned brightly, Moreau's reticence suggested a different kind of motive, one rooted in the past. Inspector Dubois, approaching with his usual gruff demeanor, handed Poirot a telegram from Marseille. "The chemist confirms Dupont's inquiry about cyanide," Dubois said, his walrus mustache twitching. "But nothing on Moreau or Benoit. They're clean, far as we know." Poirot nodded, tucking the telegram into his pocket. "Clean, perhaps, on paper. But the heart, Inspector, it leaves no receipts. Let us speak with Monsieur Moreau." The guide's domain. Jacques Moreau was found at the camp's corral, tending to the mules with a practiced hand. His weathered face, lined like the cliffs around them, was set in a mask of indifference, but his eyes flickered with wariness as Poirot and Hastings approached. His coarse woolen jacket hung loosely on his broad frame, and a faint scent of tobacco clung to him, mingling with the earthy aroma of the mules. "Monsieur Moreau," Poirot began, his voice smooth and courteous, "you have been most helpful in describing the camp's routines, but I wish to know more of you, of your history with Monsieur Laroche." Moreau's hands paused on a mule's harness, his fingers tightening briefly. "Not much to tell," he growled, his voice low and rough. "I've guided expeditions in these hills for 20 years. Laroche hired me because I know every path, every cave." That's all. Poirot's head tilted, his eyes narrowing. "And yet I sense a deeper connection. You mentioned yesterday that you worked for Laroche's father, non? Tell me of this." Moreau's jaw tightened, and he turned to face Poirot, his eyes dark with something unspoken. "Old Laroche was a hard man, ran a trading company in Marseille, cheated me out of wages years ago. I was young, needed the work, so I took it." Never forgot, though Poirot's gaze was unyielding, though his tone remained gentle. "A grievance, then. Did this resentment extend to the son, Monsieur Etienne Laroche?" Moreau snorted, brushing dust from his hands. "Vigladaya, he wasn't his father. Etienne was reckless, obsessed with his treasure, but he paid fair. I had no quarrel with him." "And the map?" Poirot pressed, his voice soft but insistent. "You said you saw him sketching it. Did you ever see its details?" Moreau hesitated, his eyes flicking to the ground. "Only glimpses. He was secretive, kept it locked in his satchel. A few days before he died, I saw him working on it by the fire, muttering about coordinates and landmarks. Looked like nonsense to me." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Nonsense, you say? And yet this nonsense is now missing. Did you perhaps desire to see it more closely?" Moreau's face darkened. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I'm a guide, not a thief. I don't care about gold or maps." "Merci, Monsieur Moreau," Poirot said, dismissing him with a nod. As Moreau returned to the mules, Poirot whispered to Hastings, "His words are steady, but his hesitation betrays him. He knows more of the map than he admits. A search for clues." With Dubois' permission, Poirot requested a discreet search of Moreau's belongings. The guide's tent was sparse, a reflection of his utilitarian life. A cot, a small table, a worn rucksack. The gendarme, careful under Poirot's watchful eye, sifted through the contents. Inside the rucksack, tucked beneath a coil of rope, they found a folded piece of paper, its edges frayed and stained. Poirot unfolded it carefully, revealing a crude sketch of lines and symbols, a fragment, perhaps, of a map. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, holding it to the light. "This is not Laroche's work. The lines are too rough, the paper too coarse. But it resembles the fragments in Dupont's tent. A copy, perhaps." Hastings, peering over his shoulder, frowned. Could Moreau have tried to recreate Laroche's map? "Or stolen a piece of it," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "We must learn how this came to be in his possession." They confronted Moreau, who stood by the corral, his arms crossed. Poirot held up the sketch, his voice calm but firm. "Monsieur Moreau, explain this, if you please." Moreau's eyes widened briefly, then narrowed. "Found it on the trail near the cave a few days back. Thought it might be Laroche's, but it was just a scrap. Kept it in case it mattered." "On the trail," Poirot repeated, his tone skeptical. "And you did not think to give it to the gendarmes?" Moreau shrugged, his expression defiant. "Didn't seem important." "Just lines on paper," Poirot dismissed him, but his mind was racing. "Hastings," he said, "this fragment is a clue, but its origin is unclear. If Moreau found it, why hide it? And if he did not, how did it reach his tent?" The village inquiry, determined to trace the cyanide's source, Poirot and Hastings accompanied Dubois to the nearby village of Saint-Remy, a cluster of stone houses nestled in a valley an hour's ride from the camp. The village was quiet, its inhabitants wary of strangers. Poirot, undeterred, sought out the local apothecary, a wizened old man named Monsieur Giraud, whose shop smelled of herbs and camphor. "Monsieur Giraud," Poirot began, his voice courteous, "we investigate the death of Monsieur Laroche. Have you sold cyanide or any substance that could be used as poison to anyone from the expedition?" Giraud's eyes, clouded with age, studied Poirot. "Cyanide? Not in years. It's not something we keep on hand. Farmers use it sometimes for pests, but I'd need a license, and none's been requested." "And visitors?" Poirot pressed. "A man named Moreau, perhaps? Or Dupont?" Giraud shook his head. "I know Moreau. Guided my brother up the hills once. Never asked for anything but bandages and liniment. The others I don't know." Poirot thanked him, his mind turning over the information. As they left the shop, he said to Hastings, "No cyanide here, but Moreau's familiarity with the village is telling. He has connections, perhaps old debts or allies." The guides passed. Back at the camp, Poirot requested Laroche's logbook again, searching for references to Moreau. A faded entry caught his eye. 10 years prior, Moreau had been dismissed from an expedition led by Laroche's father after a dispute over missing supplies. The details were vague, but the implication was clear. Bad blood lingered. "Interesting," Poirot said, showing the entry to Hastings. "Moreau claims no quarrel with the son, but the father's actions may have left a scar. Revenge, mon ami, can simmer for years." Hastings frowned. "Enough to kill? And what about the map fragment?" "A good question," Poirot said. "The fragment suggests Moreau was curious about Laroche's map, perhaps more than he admits. Did he steal it or merely find it? We must watch him closely. Evening observations." As night fell, the camp grew quiet, the fire casting long shadows across the tents. Poirot, standing by the corral, observed Moreau as he smoked a pipe, his eyes fixed on the distant hills. The guide's movements were steady, but his glances toward the evidence tent were frequent, almost compulsive. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot whispered. "He is uneasy." The fragment in his tent, his history with Laroche's father, these are pieces of a puzzle. But do they form a picture of guilt? Hastings, shivering in the evening chill, said, "He's hiding something, that's for sure. But poison? That seems more Dupont's style. Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes never leaving Moreau. "But the guide knows these hills, their secrets, their dangers. If he wished to kill, he could do so with subtlety. Tomorrow we shall press him further, and perhaps the little gray cells will uncover his secret." As the stars emerged, Poirot retired to his tent, his mind a whirl of deductions. The guide's secret, like the missing map, was a shadow waiting to be illuminated, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it was. Chapter 6. The Porter's Fear. The Provençal morning was cloaked in a thin fog, softening the harsh lines of the hills and lending the expedition camp an air of ghostly quiet. The tents, damp with dew, sagged slightly, and the mules stamped restlessly in their corral, their breath visible in the cool air. Hercule Poirot, ever immaculate in his tailored suit, stood near the central fire pit, where a small blaze had been kindled to ward off the chill. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, watched the camp's activity with the precision of a watchmaker. Captain Hastings, bundled in a scarf and looking distinctly uncomfortable, joined him, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee. "Blasted fog," Hastings muttered, rubbing his hands together. "Makes this place feel like a ghost story. Any progress, Poirot, or are we still chasing shadows?" Poirot's moustache curved in a faint smile. "Shadows, mon ami, often hide the truth. Today we turn our gaze to young Monsieur Claude Benoit, the porter. His fear, it is palpable, but is it the fear of guilt or of something else entirely?" The investigation had gained momentum with each passing day. The poisoned flask, the map fragments found in Dupont's and Moreau's possessions, and the elusive trail of cyanide had painted a complex picture. Yet Benoit, the youngest and seemingly least likely suspect, intrigued Poirot. His nervous demeanor, his trembling hands, suggested a man caught in a web not entirely of his own making. Inspector Dubois, approaching with his usual brusqueness, carried a new report from the gendarmes' inquiries in Saint-Remy. "Nothing more from the village," Dubois said, his walrus mustache twitching. "No one's seen cyanide, and Benoit's barely known there. Just a lad who took odd jobs before Laroche hired him." Poirot nodded, his gloved fingers brushing his chin. "Merci, Inspector, but it is not the village that holds Benoit's secrets. It is here, in the camp, in his actions and silences. Let us speak with him." The porter's burden. Claude Benoit was found near the supply tent, sorting through a pile of ropes and canvas with a distracted air. His boyish face, pale and drawn, betrayed his youth, barely 20, with a mop of sandy hair and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. His clothes, patched and worn, spoke of a life of meager means, and his hands, raw from work, fidgeted constantly. As Poirot and Hastings approached, he flinched, dropping a coil of rope. "Monsieur Benoit," Poirot began, his voice gentle, almost paternal. "You are troubled, I see. There is no need for fear, not yet. I wish only to understand your part in this sad affair." Benoit's eyes flicked to the ground, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't do anything wrong. I just I just worked for Monsieur Laroche. Poirot's head tilted, his gaze soft but piercing. And yet you tremble, jeune homme. Tell me, what did you see on the day Monsieur Laroche died? You were here in the camp tending the mules, non? Benoit nodded, his hands twisting together. Yes, sir. I was checking the harnesses, filling the water canteens. Monsieur Laroche was in his tent early, then he went to the cave. I didn't see him after that. And the flask? Poirot asked, his tone unchanged. You filled it that morning, you said. Did you notice anything unusual, its weight, its smell, perhaps? Benoit's face paled further, if that were possible. No, nothing. It was just water from the canteen. I filled it, locked it in his satchel, and gave him the key. He always kept it locked. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Always, you say. And yet the flask was poisoned. Tell me, Monsieur Benoit, did you see anyone near the canteens that day? Monsieur Dupont, perhaps, or Monsieur Moreau? Benoit hesitated, his eyes darting to the side. I don't know. Everyone was around coming and going. I was busy with the mules. But I heard Monsieur Dupont and Monsieur Laroche arguing near the fire. It was loud. Something about the map, an argument, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. And what did you hear precisely? Benoit swallowed, his voice trembling. Monsieur Laroche said Dupont was following him, trying to steal his work. Dupont called him a liar, said he'd find the treasure first. It got heated. Then Dupont stormed off. Poirot nodded, his expression encouraging. And after this, did you see Dupont near the canteens or perhaps near Laroche's tent? Benoit shook his head vigorously. No, sir. I didn't see anything like that, I swear. I just did my job. Merci, Monsieur Benoit, Poirot said, patting his shoulder. You have been most helpful. Do not distress yourself. The truth will protect the innocent. As Benoit scurried back to his tasks, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. The boy is terrified, Hastings. But of what? Guilt? Or the fear of being blamed? His story is consistent, yet his fear speaks of something more. A closer look. Poirot requested a moment alone with Benoit's belongings, which were stored in a small corner of the supply tent. With Dubois' approval, he and Hastings sifted through the porter's meager possessions. A spare shirt, a worn blanket, a tin of tobacco, and a small knife for cutting rope. Nothing incriminating surfaced, but Poirot's attention was drawn to a crumpled piece of cloth tucked inside a sock, a handkerchief stained with a faint yellowish mark similar to the cloth found with the flask. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, holding it to the light. This is no coincidence. The stain, it smells faintly of almonds, cyanide perhaps. How does a porter come by such a thing? Hastings frowned. You think Benoit poisoned the flask? Poirot shook his head. No, it is too simple. Benoit lacks the cunning, the motive. But this cloth, it suggests he touched something he should not have. Perhaps he saw something or was used by another. They confronted Benoit again, this time in the privacy of Poirot's tent. The young man's eyes widened at the sight of the handkerchief, his hands trembling. That's mine, he stammered, but I didn't do anything. Calm yourself, Poirot said, his voice soothing. Tell me, where did you find this cloth? Benoit's voice was barely audible. It was in the supply tent, near the canteens a few days before Monsieur Laroche died. I thought it was just a rag, so I kept it to clean my knife. I didn't know it was anything bad. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And you saw no one place it there? No, sir. Benoit said, his voice breaking. "I swear I didn't know." Poirot dismissed him gently, but his mind was racing. "Hastings," he said, "this cloth links Benoit to the poison, but not as the killer. He is a pawn, perhaps, in another's game. Someone placed that cloth where he would find it. Knowing his duties brought him to the canteens, the camp's undercurrents. As midday approached, Poirot observed the camp's dynamics, noting the subtle interactions among the suspects. Moreau, working Rosa, worked with a steady hand, but his eyes darted toward Benoit when he thought no one was watching. Dupin, sketching furiously in his tent, avoided the others, his anger a tangible barrier. Benoit, meanwhile, kept to himself, his nervous energy evident in every hurried step. Poirot spoke quietly to Dubois, requesting a chemical analysis of the handkerchief. "If it bears cyanide," he said, "it confirms the poison was handled in the camp, not brought from elsewhere." "This narrows our search." Dubois, skeptical but cooperative, sent the cloth to Marseille for testing. "You think the boy's involved?" he asked. "Not directly," Poirot replied. "His fear is not of guilt, but of being ensnared. Someone used his access to the canteens, perhaps to taint the flask. We must find who. A new hypothesis." That afternoon, Poirot sat with Hastings in their tent, piecing together the clues. "Consider," he said, pacing slowly. "The flask was poisoned with cyanide. The cloth found in Benoit's possession bears its trace, and the map is missing. The killer needed access to the flask, knowledge of Benoit's duties, and a reason to steal the map." Benoit overheard the argument, but did he see more? Hastings, chewing on a biscuit, ventured, "You think someone framed him?" "Or used him," Poirot said. "The cloth was placed where he would find it, perhaps to divert suspicion. Benoit is young, impressionable, a perfect tool for a cunning mind." As evening fell, Poirot stood by the fire, his silhouette small but commanding. The porter's fear was a thread in the tapestry of deceit, leading to a darker truth. The map, the poison, the handkerchief, all pointed to a calculated murder, and Poirot's little gray cells were closing in on the weaver of this deadly web. Chapter 7. The Hidden Clue. The Provençal hills were bathed in a soft amber glow as the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning's fog. The expedition camp, though still marked by the tension of Etienne Laroche's death, bustled with the quiet efficiency of routine. Gendarmes moved purposefully, their boots crunching on the gravel, while the mules snorted in their corral, oblivious to the human drama unfolding around them. Hercule Poirot, his suit as pristine as ever, stood just outside the camp's perimeter, his green eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the cave where Laroche had met his end. His gloved hands clasped behind his back, he seemed almost a statue lost in the intricate workings of his little gray cells. Captain Hastings, emerging from their tent with a yawn, adjusted his hat and joined Poirot, his face a mix of curiosity and mild frustration. "Another day of poking about, Poirot," he said, squinting at the cave. "I swear this place is starting to feel like a labyrinth, and we're no closer to the Minotaur." Poirot's mustache quivered with a faint smile. "Patience, mon ami, the labyrinth of the human heart is complex, but every turn reveals a clue. Today I return to the cave. There is something we have overlooked, a whisper of truth hidden in the shadows." Inspector Dubois, his walrus mustache drooping with the weight of another sleepless night, approached with a clipped nod. Monsieur Poirot, the analysis of the handkerchief from Benoit's belongings is still pending. Marseille's chemists are slow, but they've promised results by tomorrow. Anything else you need? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oui, Inspector. I wish to examine the cave alone with only Hastings for company. The gendarmes, they are thorough, but their eyes seek the obvious. I seek the subtle Dubois, raised an eyebrow but shrugged. As you wish. The cave's secured. Just don't disturb the scene, Poirot inclined his head. Merci. The scene, it will speak to me if I listen. The cave's secrets. The cave's entrance loomed like a wound in the hillside, its jagged edges softened by the morning light. Poirot, carrying a small lantern, stepped inside with Hastings trailing behind, muttering about the damp and the chill. The air was heavy with the scent of wet stone and something faintly metallic, a reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded here. The lantern's glow cast eerie shadows on the stalactites, which hung like silent sentinels over Laroche's final resting place. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his polished shoes navigating the uneven floor as if it were a ballroom. The spot where Laroche's body had been found was marked by a chalk outline, the satchel still lying nearby, its contents undisturbed since the gendarmes' initial search. Poirot knelt beside it, his magnifying glass glinting in the lantern's light. "Observe, Hastings," he said softly. "The satchel is open, but the contents are not scattered haphazardly. The compass, the coins, they remain, yet the map is gone. This is no robbery, but a theft with purpose." Hastings, peering over his shoulder, frowned. "You think the killer took the map after poisoning him?" "Précisément," Poirot replied, his voice low. "But why leave the body here?" "The cave is remote, yet not hidden. The killer wished to delay discovery, perhaps to escape with the map." His eyes scanned the surrounding area, noting the scuff mark he had seen before. A faint trace of a boot, distinct from Laroche's. But now his attention was drawn to a narrow crevice in the cave wall, barely visible behind a stalagmite. He crouched, angling the lantern to illuminate the gap. There, wedged in the shadows, was a small glass vial, no larger than a thimble, its surface smudged with dust. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, retrieving it with a handkerchief. He held it to his nose, detecting a faint, bitter, almond-like scent. "Cyanide, Hastings. This is the vessel that held the poison before it reached the flask." Hastings' eyes widened. "The killer dropped it? That's careless or intentional," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. "Perhaps it was meant to be found to point to another. Or perhaps in haste it was overlooked." He tucked the vial carefully into his pocket, his mind racing. "This changes the puzzle, mon ami. The vial was not with the flask, but hidden. Why hide it unless to protect the killer's identity?" Back at the camp. Returning to the camp, Poirot requested a private meeting with Inspector Dubois. He presented the vial, wrapped in his handkerchief, and explained its significance. "This, Inspector, is a silent witness. It contained the cyanide that killed Laroche. We must test it for fingerprints, though I suspect the killer was cautious." Dubois, his skepticism tempered by Poirot's certainty, nodded. "I'll send it to Marseille with the handkerchief." "But what does it mean? Anyone could have dropped it." "Not anyone," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "The vial was in the cave near the body. Only someone who entered after Laroche's death could have left it. We must consider who had the opportunity." Hastings, pacing the tent, ventured. Dupin's the obvious one, isn't he? He had the map fragments, asked about cyanide in Marseille, and he was out alone that day. Poirot raised a hand. Do not rush to conclusions, Hastings. Dupin's ambition is clear, but Moreau's reticence and Benoit's fear are equally compelling. The vial, it narrows the field, but it does not yet name the culprit confronting the suspects. Poirot gathered the three suspects by the fire pit, the vial held aloft in his gloved hand. The camp fell silent, the gendarmes watching from a distance. Jacques Moreau's weathered face remained impassive, but his hands clenched briefly. Victor Dupin's hawkish features tightened, his eyes darting to the vial. Claude Benoit, pale and trembling, looked as if he might bolt. Monsieur, Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. This vial was found in the cave near where Monsieur Laroche died. It held cyanide, the poison that killed him. I ask you, who among you has seen such a vial before? Moreau's voice was gruff. Never seen it. Caves are full of junk, could be anyone's. Dupin's sneer was quick. You're grasping, Poirot. Maybe Laroche carried it himself. Ever think he poisoned himself? The man was obsessed, maybe unhinged. Poirot's eyes flicked to Dupin. An interesting theory, monsieur, but unlikely. Laroche was a man of purpose, not despair. And you, Monsieur Benoit? Benoit's voice was a whisper, his eyes fixed on the ground. I don't know, sir. I never went in the cave, I swear. Poirot nodded, dismissing them. As they dispersed, he whispered to Hastings, their reactions are telling. Moreau is too calm, Dupin too quick to deflect, Benoit too frightened. The vial is a key, but it unlocks more questions. A new thread. That afternoon, Poirot reviewed the evidence with Dubois, cross-referencing the vial with the other clues. The handkerchief from Benoit's belongings, now in Marseille for analysis, was a potential link. But the vial's placement in the cave suggested a different hand. Consider, Poirot said, pacing the tent. The killer poisons the flask, waits for Laroche to collapse, then takes the map. But why leave the vial? To incriminate another or because they were disturbed? Hastings frowned. Disturbed? By whom? The cave's remote. Exactly, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. Which means the killer was confident they would not be seen. Or they had a reason to return. We must search the cave again for any sign of a struggle or another's presence. He requested a second examination of the cave, this time focusing on the area around the crevice. The gendarmes, under Dubois' direction, found nothing new, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught a faint scratch on the stalagmite near the crevice, a mark not unlike the one on the flask's rim. Aha, he said, this is no accident. A tool, perhaps, or a ring scraped in haste. The killer was here, and they were not alone. Evening reflections. As night fell, the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, the fire's glow casting long shadows. Poirot stood by the corral watching the suspects as they moved about their tasks. Moreau sharpened a knife with deliberate care. Dupin pored over his maps, and Benoit fed the mules, his hands shaking. Each man, Poirot knew, held a piece of the truth, but the vial had shifted the puzzle's shape. Hastings, he said, his voice low, the vial is a hidden clue, but it is not the whole story. Someone placed it in the crevice, perhaps to hide it, perhaps to mislead. Tomorrow we await the analysis of the handkerchief and vial, but tonight we watch, for the killer knows we are close. As the stars emerged over the hills, Poirot's mind churned with possibilities. The vial, the flask, the map fragments, all were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and he was determined to weave them into clarity. The truth, he knew, was near, waiting to be uncovered by the relentless work of his little gray cells. Chapter 8. The Map's Shadow. The Provençal hills stood silent under a sky of deepening blue, the afternoon sun casting long, jagged shadows across the expedition camp. The air, heavy with the scent of dry earth and pine, carried a faint tension, as if the landscape itself held its breath. Hercule Poirot, his suit immaculate despite the dust, stood near the central fire pit, his green eyes scanning the camp with the precision of a metronome. The discovery of the cyanide vial in the cave had sharpened his focus, and the threads of the puzzle, Laroche's poisoned flask, the missing map, the stained handkerchief, were beginning to weave into a pattern only his little gray cells could discern. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, emerged from their tent, his face flushed from the heat. He mopped his brow with a handkerchief and sighed. Dash it, Poirot, this case is like trying to solve a jigsaw with half the pieces missing. That vial's got you thinking, hasn't it? Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. The vial, mon ami, is a whisper from the killer. It speaks of intent, of carelessness, or perhaps of cunning. Today we pursue the shadow of the map, for it is the heart of this mystery. Inspector Dubois approached, his walrus mustache bristling with impatience. He carried a telegram from Marseille, its edges creased from his grip. The chemists have confirmed the handkerchief from Benoit's belongings bears traces of cyanide, he said. No fingerprints on the vial, though, clean as a whistle. What do you make of it, Poirot? Poirot's eyes gleamed as he took the telegram. Most interesting, Inspector. The handkerchief links young Benoit to the poison, yet the vial's lack of print suggests a careful hand. The map, however, remains the key. Its absence is no accident. It was taken for a purpose. Hastings frowned. To find the treasure, obviously, but who'd kill for it? Précisément, Poirot said, his voice low. But the motive may be more than greed. Let us explore further Laroche's boast. Poirot requested Laroche's logbook once more, poring over its pages with meticulous care. A recent entry caught his attention. Laroche had written of a breakthrough in his search for the Visigothic gold, claiming his map was nearly complete, its final coordinates confirmed by a ruin he'd discovered in the hills. He had boasted of this to the camp, according to the log, the night before his death, his words laced with triumph. This is significant, Hastings, Poirot said, tapping the page. Laroche's confidence drew attention, perhaps too much. The killer saw their chance, knowing the map was within reach. Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. So they poisoned him, waited for him to collapse in the cave, then took the map. But why tear it? Those fragments we found, Dupont's and Moreau's, don't make sense. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The fragments. They are a puzzle within a puzzle. Perhaps the map was torn in a struggle, or deliberately to mislead. We must learn more. He requested a meeting with the camp's cook, a grizzled man named Pierre, who had served Laroche's meals and overheard his conversations. Pierre, wiping flour from his hands, confirmed the boast. "Oh, aye, Monsieur Laroche was full of it that night," he said, his voice rough. Said he'd beat Dupont to the gold, map or no map. Dupont was furious, stormed off. Moreau just sat there, quiet-like, and young Benoit looked like he'd seen a ghost. Poirot's head tilted. And did anyone approach Laroche's tent afterward? Pierre shrugged. Couldn't say. I was cleaning the pots, but I saw Benoit near the canteens later, looking nervous. Merci, monsieur, Pierre, Poirot said, dismissing him. To Hastings, he whispered. The boast set the stage, Hastings. It was the spark that ignited the killer's plan. A second search, with Dubois' permission, Poirot ordered another search of the suspect's tents, this time focusing on any evidence tied to the map. The gendarmes, methodical under Poirot's watchful eye, returned to Victor Dupont's tent first. Hidden in the binding of one of his journals, they found another fragment of parchment, its edges jagged and its lines matching those found in Moreau's possession. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, examining it with his magnifying glass. This fragment, it is part of Laroche's map. The ink, the paper, they are identical to Moreau's. But how did it come to Dupont? Dupont, summoned to explain, stood with his arms crossed, his hawkish face defiant. I told you I found it near the cave after Laroche died. I kept it to study, that's all. Poirot's gaze was unyielding. And yet you hid it, monsieur. A curious choice for an innocent man, Dupont's eyes flashed. I'm not a fool, Poirot. If I'd turned it over, you'd have accused me of stealing it. I was protecting myself. Protecting, Poirot repeated, his tone soft but sharp. Or concealing. As Dupont stormed off, Poirot turned to Hastings. The fragments link Dupont and Moreau, but Benoit's fear suggests he knows something of their movements. We must press him further. Benoit's confession, Poirot found Claude Benoit by the corral, feeding the mules with a distracted air. The young porter's face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept. Poirot approached gently, his voice soothing. Monsieur Benoit, you are troubled. I see it in your eyes. Tell me, what do you know of the map? Benoit's hands shook and he dropped a handful of grain. I didn't take it, Monsieur Poirot. I swear. But I saw something, the night before Monsieur Laroche died. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Speak, jeune homme. The truth will ease your burden. Benoit swallowed, his voice barely audible. I was checking the canteens late. I saw Monsieur Dupont near Laroche's tent, looking around like he didn't want to be seen. I thought he was just angry from the argument, but maybe he was after the map. And Monsieur Moreau? Poirot asked, his tone encouraging. I didn't see him, Benoit said, his eyes darting to the ground. But he was always watching Laroche, especially when he talked about the map. It made me nervous. Poirot patted his shoulder. Merci, Monsieur Benoit. You have done well to speak. As Benoit scurried away, Poirot whispered to Hastings. The boy's fear is of what he witnessed, not what he did. Dupont's presence near the tent, Moreau's watchfulness, these are pieces of the puzzle. The map's significance. Back in their tent, Poirot spread the map fragments on a folding table, studying their lines. The parchment was old, its ink faded but precise, marking landmarks that aligned with the hills around the camp. These are not the whole map, he said, but they are enough to suggest Laroche was close to his goal. The killer took the rest, perhaps to find the treasure, or to ensure no one else could. Hastings frowned. But why tear it? If they wanted the treasure, they'd keep it intact. Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. The tearing was an accident, a struggle, as Laroche fought for his life. Or perhaps it was deliberate, to scatter suspicion. The fragments in Dupont's and Moreau's tents suggest both had contact with the map, but Benoit's testimony points to Dupont. Evening theories. As night fell, the camp grew quiet. the fire's glow casting flickering shadows. Poirot stood by the corral watching the suspects. Dupont in his tent was writing furiously, his face set in a scowl. Moreau, sharpening a knife, glanced occasionally toward the cave. Benoit, feeding the mules, avoided eye contact with everyone. Poirot spoke softly to Hastings. "The map's shadow looms over this crime, mon ami." Laroche's boast drew the killer's hand, but the poison, the vial, the fragments. These suggest a mind both cunning and desperate. Tomorrow we shall test the suspect's stories, perhaps with a trap. Hastings, shivering in the evening chill, said, "A trap?" "You're getting theatrical, Poirot." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Theater, Hastings, is sometimes the stage for truth. The killer believes they are safe, but the little gray cells, they are closing in." As the stars emerged, Poirot retired to his tent, his mind a whirl of deductions. The map's shadow was long, but he was determined to step into its light, revealing the killer who had stolen both a treasure and a life. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The Provençal evening draped the expedition camp in a velvet hush, broken only by the crackle of the central fire and the distant call of a night bird. The air, cool and sharp with the scent of pine, carried a weight of anticipation, as if the hills themselves sensed the drama about to unfold. Hercule Poirot, his silhouette compact yet commanding, stood at the edge of the firelight, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man on the cusp of revelation. His suit, untouched by the dust of the day, was a testament to his unyielding precision even in the wilds of Provence. Captain Hastings, his face etched with the fatigue of days spent chasing clues, joined Poirot, his scarf pulled tight against the chill. "You've got that look, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "The one that says you're about to turn this camp upside down. What's the plan?" Poirot's mustache curved in a subtle smile. "The plan, mon ami, is to stir the waters and see what rises. The map's shadow grows clearer, but the killer remains hidden. Tonight, we confront them, not with accusations, but with questions that pierce the heart." The camp was a tableau of tension. Gendarmes patrolling the perimeter, their lanterns casting fleeting glows, the mules snuffling in their corral, and the three suspects, Jacques Moreau, Victor Dupont, and Claude Benoit, moving with the wary caution of men who knew they were watched. Inspector Dubois, his walrus mustache bristling, approached Poirot with a gruff nod. "The latest from Marseille," he said, handing over a telegram. "The vial's clean, as I said, but the handkerchief from Benoit's things, it's got cyanide traces, no doubt. No fingerprints, though." Poirot's eyes scanned the telegram, his mind racing. "Merci, Inspector. The handkerchief confirms the poison's presence in the camp, but the absence of prints suggests a careful hand. Tonight we shall test the nerves of our suspects." He requested a gathering in the main tent, a spacious canvas structure lit by lanterns that cast a warm, flickering glow. The suspects were summoned, their faces a study in contrasts. Moreau's weathered stoicism, Dupont's hawkish defiance, Benoit's trembling fear. The gendarmes stood guard at the tent's entrance, their presence a silent reminder of the stakes. The gathering Poirot stood at the center of the tent, his small stature belied by the authority in his voice. "Messieurs," he began, his tone calm but resonant, "the death of Monsieur Etienne Laroche is a puzzle, and you, each of you, hold a piece. A flask poisoned with cyanide, a map stolen and torn, a vial hidden in a cave. Tonight I ask you to look into your hearts and speak the truth." He paced slowly, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Monsieur Laroche was poisoned, his map taken in the moment of his death. The question is, who had the motive, the means, and the opportunity? He turned first to Jacques Moreau, whose broad frame filled a folding chair, his hands resting heavily on his knees. "Monsieur Moreau, you bore a grudge against Laroche's father, a man who wronged you years ago. Did this resentment extend to the son? Did you seek revenge, perhaps, by poisoning his flask and taking his map?" Moreau's eyes narrowed, but his voice was steady. "I told you, Poirot, I had no quarrel with Etienne. His father was a cheat, but the son paid me fair. I didn't touch his flask, and I didn't take his map. That fragment you found, I picked it up on the trail, nothing more." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And yet your hands tremble when we speak of the cave, monsieur. A small thing, but the little gray cells they notice?" He turned to Claude Benoit, who stood at the tent's edge, his boyish face pale and his hands twisting together. "Monsieur Benoit, your fear is plain. You handled the flask, you found a handkerchief stained with cyanide. Did you act out of desperation, perhaps coerced by another? Or do you hide a secret we have yet to uncover?" Benoit's voice cracked, his eyes wide. "I didn't do it, Monsieur Poirot. I filled the flask with water like always. The handkerchief, I found it, I swear. I didn't know it was poisoned. I'm no killer." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "Your fear, jeune homme, is genuine. But is it of guilt or of what you have seen? You spoke of Monsieur Dupont near Laroche's tent. What else did you witness?" Benoit shook his head, tears welling. "Nothing more, I swear. I just saw him there, looking sneaky." I was scared to say more. Poirot nodded, then turned to Victor Dupont, who leaned against a tent pole, his hawkish features tight with anger. "Monsieur Dupont, your rivalry with Laroche was fierce. You coveted his map, his success, the fragments in your tent, your inquiries about cyanide in Marseille. These paint a picture of ambition unchecked. Did you poison Laroche to claim the Visigothic gold?" Dupont's eyes flashed, and he stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You've got it all wrong, Poirot. Yes, I wanted the map. Who wouldn't? I found those fragments outside the cave after he was dead. I kept them to study, not to hide. And cyanide? I asked about it for a dig, not for murder." Poirot raised a hand, his voice cutting through the tension. "Patience, monsieur. The truth is near, but it hides in the shadows of your words. The map was torn, the flask poisoned, the vial hidden. Someone in this camp planned Laroche's death with care." The suspect's reactions. The tent was thick with silence, the suspect's faces illuminated by the flickering lanterns. Moreau's hands clenched, his jaw set. Dupont's sneer faltered, his eyes darting to the tent's entrance. Benoit, trembling, looked as if he might collapse. The gendarme shifted, sensing the rising tension. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "The map's fragments found in the tents of Monsieur Dupont and Monsieur Moreau suggest a struggle, or perhaps a deliberate scattering to confuse. The vial in the cave, the handkerchief in Benoit's possession, these are not accidents. They are the marks of a mind both cunning and desperate." He paused, his eyes sweeping the group. "I ask you now if any of you know more to speak. The little gray cells, they see much, but the heart must confess." No one spoke. Moreau stared at the ground, Dupont crossed his arms defiantly and Benoit's breath hitched. Poirot nodded as if expecting the silence. Very well. The truth will not hide forever. Tomorrow we shall uncover more. As the suspects were dismissed, Poirot whispered to Hastings, "Their silence is louder than their words, mon ami. Dupont's defiance masks fear. Moreau's calm hides calculation, and Benoit's terror speaks of knowledge he dares not share." A private council. Back in their tent, Poirot sat with Hastings and Dubois, the lantern casting a warm glow on their faces. He spread the map fragments on a table, alongside the vial and the telegram. "Consider," he said, "the sequence of events. Laroche boasts of his map, inflaming the killer's motive. The flask is poisoned, likely through the canteen Benoit used. The map is taken, torn in haste or by design. The vial is hidden, the handkerchief left to be found. This is a crime of opportunity, but also of planning." Hastings frowned, sipping a tin mug of tea. "Dupont's still the likeliest, isn't he? He's got the motive, the map fragments, and the cyanide connection." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "But Moreau's history with Laroche's father and Benoit's fear of what he saw, these cannot be ignored. The killer used Benoit's access to the canteens, perhaps knowing he would be blamed." Dubois grunted. "So what's next, Poirot?" "We can't arrest them all." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "We do not arrest, Inspector. We watch, we listen, we provoke. Tomorrow, I shall set a trap, a small deception to draw the killer into the light." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "A trap? You're being cryptic again." Poirot chuckled softly. "The theater of the mind, Hastings. The killer believes they are safe, but a single misstep will betray them. The map's shadow grows shorter, and the truth is near night's watch." As the camp settled into silence, Poirot stood outside, his silhouette framed by the dying fire. The stars glittered above, cold and unyielding, mirroring the clarity of his thoughts. The confrontation had stirred the suspects, their reactions revealing cracks in their facades. The killer, he knew, was among them, their guilt hidden in the shadows of their words and deeds. Tomorrow, Poirot would cast a net, and the truth would be caught at last. Chapter 10. The Little Gray Cells. The Provençal night was a tapestry of stars, their cold light piercing the velvet darkness that enveloped the expedition camp. The air, sharp with the scent of pine and cooling earth, carried a stillness that seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the unraveling of a deadly secret. Hercule Poirot, his silhouette small but resolute, sat in the dim glow of a lantern within his tent, his gloved hands folded neatly over a folding table. The map fragments, the cyanide vial, and the stained handkerchief lay before him, silent witnesses to a crime that grew clearer with each passing hour. His green eyes, sharp as ever, gleamed with the intensity of a mind at work, piecing together the intricate puzzle of Etienne Laroche's murder. Captain Hastings, sprawled on a cot with a tin mug of tea, stifled a yawn. "You're burning the midnight oil, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with weary admiration. "I swear you're closer to solving this than you're letting on. What's brewing in those little gray cells of yours?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "The little gray cells, mon ami, they are like a chef crafting a delicate sauce. Each ingredient must be measured, each flavor balanced. Tonight they simmer, for tomorrow we shall serve the truth." The confrontation in the main tent had stirred the camp's undercurrents, revealing the suspect's nerves. Jacques Moreau's stoic reserve, Victor Dupont's fiery defiance, Claude Benoit's trembling fear. The cyanide vial, the map fragments, and the handkerchief had tightened the web around them, but the killer's identity remained just out of reach. Poirot knew the time had come to press harder, to coax the truth from the shadows. Inspector Dubois entered the tent, his walrus mustache drooping with fatigue. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, setting down a fresh telegram from Marseille. "The chemists found no new traces on the vial or handkerchief, but they confirmed the cyanide was pure, likely procured from a specialized source, not a village apothecary. Any thoughts?" Poirot's eyes scanned the telegram, his mind racing. "Merci, Inspector. This confirms the killer's sophistication. The cyanide was brought to the camp, not found here. But it is the map and the motives it inspires that will lead us to the culprit." The puzzle's shape. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled, and began to outline his deductions to Hastings and Dubois. "Consider, monsieur, the sequence of this crime. Monsieur Laroche, he boasts of his map, a map nearly complete, pointing to the Visigothic gold. This boast, it inflames the killer's motive, greed, revenge, or perhaps fear. The flask, a gift from a Marseille patron, is poisoned with cyanide, likely through the camp's water canteen which young Benoit handled. Laroche drinks, collapses in the cave, and the map is taken, torn in haste or by design. A vial empty of cyanide is hidden in a crevice. A handkerchief stained with the same poison is found in Benoit's possession." Hastings frowned, his tea forgotten. But why tear the map? If the killer wanted the treasure, they'd keep it whole. "Précisément," Poirot said, his voice low. "The tearing suggests a struggle or a deliberate act to scatter suspicion. The fragments in Monsieur Dupont's and Monsieur Moreau's tents, they are pieces of a larger truth, and Benoit's handkerchief, it links him to the poison, yet his fear suggests he is not the mastermind." Dubois grunted, crossing his arms. "So who's your money on, Poirot? Dupont's got the motive and the cyanide connection. Moreau's got a grudge. Benoit's just a scared kid." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Each has a shadow, Inspector. Dupont's ambition burns bright, but is it enough to kill? Moreau's past with Laroche's father suggests revenge, but his calm is too studied. Benoit, he is terrified, but of what? Guilt or knowledge? We must consider the means. Who had access to cyanide? Who knew Laroche's habits? Who could enter the cave unseen? He paused, his gaze distant. The flask, it is ornate, a symbol of Laroche's pride. The killer chose it deliberately, knowing he would drink from it in the cave's heat. The vial, hidden in the crevice, suggests haste or misdirection. The handkerchief left in Benoit's things points to a frame or a careless mistake. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. You think someone's trying to pin it on Benoit? Perhaps, Poirot said. Or they used his access to the canteens, knowing he would be blamed. The killer is cunning but not infallible. The little gray cells, they see the cracks in their plan. A plan takes shape. Poirot rose, pacing the small tent with measured steps. Tomorrow we shall set a trap, a subtle deception to draw the killer out. We must make them believe the map is not lost, that another clue exists, one they cannot resist. Dubois raised an eyebrow. A trap? You're playing a dangerous game, Poirot. Dangerous, oui, Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. But the truth, it is worth the risk. We shall announce that a second map, hidden by Laroche, has been found in the cave. We will invite the suspects to join us at dawn to retrieve it. The killer, driven by greed or fear, will act. Hastings' eyes widened. You're baiting them. What if they don't take it? They will, Poirot said, his voice firm. The map is the heart of this crime. The killer cannot afford to let it slip away again. He outlined the plan. Dubois would spread the word through the camp, ensuring the suspects overheard. Poirot and Hastings would watch the cave before dawn, hidden in the shadows, to see who came. The gendarmes would be positioned nearby, ready to act. The killer, Poirot said, will betray themselves by their actions, not their words. The night's watch. As the camp settled into silence, Poirot stepped outside, his silhouette framed by the lantern's glow. The fire pit smoldered, casting faint light on the tents where the suspects slept, or pretended to. Moreau's tent was dark, but a faint movement suggested he was awake. Dupont's lantern flickered, his shadow moving as he pored over his journals. Benoit's tent was still, but his nervous energy lingered in the air. Poirot spoke softly to Hastings, who had followed him. Observe, mon ami. The camp is quiet, but the minds of our suspects are not. The map's shadow looms over them, and our trap will force one to step into the light. Hastings shivered, pulling his scarf tighter. I hope you're right, Poirot. This place is giving me the creeps. Poirot chuckled softly. Fear not, Hastings. The little gray cells, they are never wrong. Tomorrow we shall see the killer's face, final preparations. Back in the tent, Poirot reviewed the evidence once more, his mind a whirl of connections. The cyanide procured in Marseille pointed to Dupont. But Moreau's knowledge of the hills and Benoit's access to the canteens could not be ignored. The map fragments, the vial, the handkerchief, all were pieces of a puzzle that only a calculated mind could assemble. He turned to Dubois, who was preparing to leave. Inspector, unsure the gendarmes are discreet. The killer must believe the map is real, but we must be ready for their move. Dubois nodded, his skepticism softening. You've got a knack for this, Poirot. I'll have my men ready. As the night deepened, Poirot sat alone, the lantern casting long shadows on the canvas walls. The little gray cells were at work, weaving the threads of motive, means, and opportunity into a tapestry of truth. The trap was set, the stage prepared, and tomorrow the killer would walk into the light of Hercule Poirot's justice. Chapter 11. The Trap. The Provençal dawn crept over the hills with a ghostly pallor. The sky a pale canvas streaked with wisps of cloud. The expedition camp lay shrouded in a thin mist, its tents and corral barely discernible in the half-light. The air was cool, scented with damp earth and the faint tang of pine, and a hush enveloped the landscape, as if the world held its breath for the drama about to unfold. Hercule Poirot, his suit immaculate despite the early hour, stood concealed behind a rocky outcrop near the cave's entrance, his green eyes sharp and unyielding. Beside him, Captain Hastings crouched, his breath visible in the chill, his face a mix of anticipation and unease. "Dash it, Poirot," Hastings whispered, adjusting his scarf. "This is like waiting for a fox to bolt from its den. Are you sure this trap of yours will work?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "The fox, mon ami, cannot resist the bait when it is hungry. Our killer hungers for the map, and today we shall see them run." The plan had been set the previous evening. Poirot had instructed Inspector Dubois to spread word through the camp that a second map, hidden by Etienne Laroche, had been discovered in the cave, a ruse to lure the killer into action. The gendarmes, positioned discreetly among the rocks, were ready to intervene, their lanterns dimmed to avoid detection. The suspects, Jacques Moreau, Victor Dupont, and Claude Benoit, had been invited to join Poirot at dawn to retrieve the supposed map. But Poirot's true intention was to watch who moved first, who betrayed their guilt in the pursuit of the Visigothic gold. The bait is set. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the mist, Poirot and Hastings waited, their eyes fixed on the cave's dark mouth. The camp was stirring, the faint clatter of tin mugs and the low murmur of voices signaling the start of the day. Dubois, playing his part, had gathered the suspects near the fire pit, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard. Monsieur Poirot says this second map could lead us straight to Laroche's treasure. We'll meet him at the cave to fetch it. Poirot, hidden in the shadows, whispered to Hastings, "Now, we watch. The killer will not resist the chance to secure the map before the others." Minutes ticked by, the mist slowly lifting as the sun climbed higher. The camp's activity seemed routine. Moreau tending the mules, Benoit sorting supplies, Dupont pacing near his tent. But Poirot's keen eyes caught a subtle shift. Victor Dupont, his hawkish features tense, slipped away from the fire pit, his movements furtive as he headed toward the cave. "Aha," Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible. "Monsieur Dupont takes the bait. But let us see how far he runs." Hastings, gripping his revolver, whispered, "He's going in alone." "That's suspicious, isn't it?" "Suspicious, oui," Poirot said, "but not yet damning. We must observe the cave's lure." Dupont approached the cave, glancing over his shoulder as if to ensure he was unseen. His lean frame disappeared into the dark entrance, his steps quick and purposeful. Poirot and Hastings crept closer, staying low among the rocks, their movements silent. The gendarmes hidden nearby signaled their readiness with a faint nod. Inside the cave, the air was damp and cool, the faint drip of water echoing in the stillness. Dupont's lantern cast a flickering glow, revealing his silhouette as he moved toward the stalagmite where Laroche's body had been found. He knelt, his hands searching the ground, his breathing rapid and uneven. Poirot, stepping silently into the cave's entrance, spoke, his voice cutting through the shadows like a blade. "Monsieur Dupont, you seek what does not exist. There is no second map. But your actions, they betray you." Dupont froze, his lantern trembling in his hand. He rose slowly, his face a mask of anger and fear. "You're bluffing, Poirot," he said, his voice sharp but unsteady. "You've got nothing on me." "No?" Poirot stepped forward, his small stature commanding despite the cave's vastness. "The map fragments in your tent, your inquiries about cyanide in Marseille, your presence near Laroche's tent the night before his death. These are not nothing, monsieur." Dupont's eyes darted to the cave's entrance where Hastings now stood, revolver in hand. "I didn't kill him," Dupont snapped. "Yes, I wanted the map, but I found those fragments outside after he was dead. I came here now to check, that's all." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "And yet you come alone at dawn to a cave where a man was murdered, a curious choice for an innocent man." Dupont's face twisted, and he lunged forward as if to push past Poirot. Hastings, quick to act, grabbed his arm, restraining him with a firm grip. The gendarmes emerged from the shadows, their lanterns illuminating the scene as they moved to secure Dupont. the struggle. "Release me," Dupont shouted, struggling against Hastings' hold. "You've got no proof, Poirot, you're fishing." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Calm yourself, monsieur. The proof, it is in the details. The cyanide procured in Marseille under a false name traced to you. The map, fragments hidden in your journal. Your argument with Laroche, witnessed by Benoit. And now, your haste to search this cave. The little gray cells they see the pattern Dubois stepping into the cave nodded to his men. Take him to the camp, but don't cuff him yet. We'll hear him out." As the gendarmes escorted Dupont back, Poirot lingered in the cave, his eyes scanning the ground where Dupont had knelt. A faint glint caught his attention. A small metal ring, perhaps from a tool or a piece of jewelry lodged in a crack. He retrieved it with his handkerchief, his mind racing. "This," he said to Hastings, holding up the ring, "is another clue. It matches the scratch on the flask and perhaps the mark in the cave. Dupont was here before, I think, back at the camp." In the main tent, Dupont sat under guard, his face a storm of defiance and fear. Moreau and Benoit were summoned, their expressions wary as they joined the gathering. Poirot stood at the center, the ring held aloft in his gloved hand. "Messieurs," he began, his voice resonant, "this ring, found in the cave, is a link to the killer. It matches marks on the flask and in the cave. Monsieur Dupont, you were quick to search for a map that does not exist. Why?" Dupont's jaw tightened. "I told you I was curious. I didn't kill him. That ring, it's not mine." Poirot turned to Moreau, whose weathered face remained impassive. "And you, Monsieur Moreau, this ring, does it belong to you?" Moreau shook his head. "Never seen it. I don't wear jewelry and I don't carry fancy tools." Benoit, trembling, spoke without prompting. "It's not mine, Monsieur Poirot." "I swear I don't know anything about it." Poirot nodded, his eyes sweeping the group. "The trap has sprung, Monsieur, and one of you has stepped into it. The ring, the fragments, the poison, they point to a truth we shall soon uncover." Evening reflections. As the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, Poirot sat with Hastings and Dubois in their tent, the lantern casting long shadows. "Dupont's actions betray him," Poirot said, "but the ring is a new piece. It suggests he was in the cave, perhaps when Laroche died. Yet Moreau's calm and Benoit's fear, they still hold secrets." Hastings frowned. "You think Dupont's our man?" "He took the bait after all." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. "But the trap was not to catch, but to reveal. Dupont's haste is damning, but the ring, it may point to another hand. Tomorrow we shall confront the final truth." As the stars glittered above, Poirot's mind churned with deductions. The trap had worked, but the killer's face was not yet fully in the light. One more step, one final revelation, and the shadow of the map would yield to the clarity of justice. Chapter 12. The Final Revelation. The Provençal dawn broke with a crystalline clarity, the sun rising over the hills to bathe the expedition camp in a golden light that belied the tension gripping its inhabitants. The air was crisp, scented with pine and the faint musk of dew-soaked earth, and the camp stirred with a quiet unease, as if sensing the culmination of a deadly drama. Hercule Poirot, his suit as immaculate as ever, stood outside his tent, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had unraveled a knot of deceit. The trap set the previous day had ensnared Victor Dupont, But Poirot knew the final act required a gathering of all players to lay bare the truth. Captain Hastings, his face etched with anticipation, joined Poirot, his scarf loose in the warming air. "You've got that look, Poirot," he said, a grin tugging at his lips. "The one that says you've cracked it. Are we finally nabbing the killer today?" Poirot's moustache curved in a subtle smile. "The little gray cells, mon ami, have worked tirelessly. Today we shall reveal the murderer of Monsieur Etienne Laroche, and the shadow of the map will be lifted." Inspector Dubois approached, his walrus mustache bristling with a mix of skepticism and respect. He carried a final telegram from Marseille, confirming the analysis of the metal ring found in the cave. "No fingerprints, Poirot," he said, handing over the paper. "But the ring's silver matches a tool in Dupont's kit, a small chisel he uses for digging. Looks bad for him." Poirot's eyes scanned the telegram, his mind clicking like a finely tuned machine. "Merci, Inspector. The ring is a thread in the tapestry, but the whole picture is now clear. Gather the suspects in the main tent. It is time for the final revelation." The final gathering. The main tent was a cauldron of tension, its canvas walls glowing faintly in the morning light. The three suspects, Jacques Moreau, Victor Dupont, and Claude Benoit, sat on folding chairs, their faces a study in contrasts. Moreau's weathered stoicism, Dupont's hawkish defiance, Benoit's trembling fear. The gendarmes stood guard at the entrance, their lanterns dimmed, but their presence a silent weight. Poirot stood at the center, his small stature commanding the space, his voice calm but resonant with authority. "Messieurs," he began, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, "the death of Monsieur Etienne Laroche was no accident, but a murder most cunning. A flask poisoned with cyanide, a map stolen and torn, a vial hidden, a handkerchief stained. These are the pieces of a puzzle that Hercule Poirot has now solved." He paced slowly, his eyes sweeping the group. "Let us reconstruct the crime. Laroche, a man obsessed with the Visigothic gold, boasted of his map, a map nearly complete. This boast, it ignited the killer's motive, greed for the treasure, a prize worth killing for. The flask, a gift from a Marseille patron, was poisoned with cyanide, administered through the camp's water canteen. Laroche drank, collapsed in the cave, and the map was taken, torn in haste. A vial was hidden, a handkerchief left to mislead. He turned to Moreau, whose hands rested heavily on his knees. "Monsieur Moreau, you bore a grudge against Laroche's father, a man who cheated you. Your knowledge of the hills, your access to the camp. Did you seek revenge?" Moreau's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "I told you, Poirot, the son was not the father. I had no reason to kill him." Poirot nodded, then faced Benoit, whose pale face glistened with sweat. "Monsieur Benoit, your fear betrays you. You handled the flask, found a poisoned handkerchief. Were you coerced, or did you act alone?" Benoit's voice cracked, tears welling. "I didn't do it, Monsieur Poirot." "I swear I just filled the flask. I don't know how the poison got there." Poirot's gaze softened, then hardened as he turned to Dupont, who sat rigid, his eyes blazing. "Monsieur Dupont, your ambition burned bright. You coveted Laroche's map, inquired about cyanide in Marseille, hid map fragments in your journal. Yesterday you ran to the cave seeking a map that did not exist. Why?" Dupont leapt to his feet, his voice a snarl. "You've got no proof, Poirot. I wanted the map, yes, but I didn't kill him. Those fragments, I found them, that's all." Poirot raised a hand, his voice cutting through the tension. "Sit, monsieur. The proof, it is here." He produced a folded paper from his pocket, a receipt from a Marseille chemist found in Dupont's journal during a final search. "This, monsieur, confirms Monsieur Dupont purchased cyanide under a false name, claiming it was for a dig. The ring in the cave matching your chisel places you at the scene. The fragments, your presence near Laroche's tent, your haste yesterday, all point to you." The confession. Dupont's face twisted, his defiance crumbling. "You're wrong," he shouted, but his voice wavered. I Poirot's eyes gleamed, relentless. "You poisoned the flask, Monsieur Dupont, knowing Laroche would drink in the cave's heat. You waited, followed him, took the map as he lay dying. In your haste, you tore it, leaving fragments behind. The vial you hid to cover your tracks, but the ring betrayed you. The handkerchief placed in Benoit's things was meant to shift blame to the boy." Dupont's shoulders slumped, his face ashen. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered, his voice breaking. "I just wanted the map. He was going to take everything, my work, my chance. I slipped the cyanide into the canteen, thinking Benoit would be blamed. I didn't mean for it to go so far." The tent was silent, the weight of his confession settling like dust. Benoit sobbed quietly, Moreau's face remained impassive, and the gendarmes moved forward, handcuffs ready. The aftermath. As Dupont was led away, Poirot turned to Hastings and Dubois, his voice low. "The ambition of Monsieur Dupont consumed him, mon ami. He saw Laroche's success as a theft of his own, and greed drove him to murder." Hastings clapped Poirot's shoulder, a grin spreading across his face. "Brilliant as always, Poirot. You had him from the start, didn't you?" Poirot adjusted his mustache, his eyes twinkling. "The little gray cells, Hastings. They see what others miss. The map's shadow is lifted and justice is served." Dubois, shaking his head in reluctant admiration, said, "I'll say this, Poirot. You're a marvel. We'll take it from here. The camp's release." As the sun climbed higher, the camp exhaled its tension, the gendarmes packing their gear and the suspects dispersing. Moreau returned to his mules, his silence unbroken. Benoit, relieved but shaken, resumed his chores, his fear replaced by gratitude. The mystery of Laroche's death was solved, the Visigothic gold still a legend, its map now a fragmented relic of a deadly ambition. Poirot stood by the corral, watching the hills as the camp dismantled around him. The truth had been uncovered, the killer unmasked, and the little gray cells had triumphed once more. As he and Hastings prepared to depart, the Provençal sun cast a warm glow, a fitting end to a case that had burned as brightly as the treasure it sought.